The South African Constitution affords children specific protections and rights as they are the most vulnerable members of society, dependent on their parents, families or the state for care and protection. Children require initiative on the part of adults to protect their rights. To talk to us about the state of initiatives in promoting the protection of children's rights, we're now joined by Department of Social Development's Director for Child Rights and Advocacy. His name is David Chabalala. Mr. Chabalala, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. Perhaps maybe let's start off here. What is your department doing to ensure that the initiatives in which, have been undertaken by your department are indeed promoted and protected for the children's rights?
Good evening, and good evening also to your viewers, and thank you very much for having me. Let me start very quickly to give some kind of a background, because it's important for those of us who are not very aglued with where we come from. As a country, back then, after having gotten into the dispensation of democracy, we must also acknowledge the fact that in 1994, the first democratically elected president, the late Tata Mandela, may his soul rest in peace, prioritized what we call the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. You'll remember, we had a backlog of many, international treaties. And because of the love for children, he said, I'm starting with this one that has to do with children. And of course, subsequently, we had the Constitution in 1996. And of course, we've got, the legal framework such as your Children's Act. And I want to go back to say, I want to quote, I am opening quote here. He once said, our first democratically elected president, to say, the nation that does not care for its children does not have a future. And yes, of course, I'm representing government here because our office is the one that is coordinating and making sure that we exercise, oversight and coordination of children's rights in the country. The office is called Office on the Rights of the Child. We're doing our best, we're doing advocacy, and I must be honest with you, this is not an easy task, because normally people will point at government to say government is not doing enough. And we must ask ourselves as to who is government? Personally, I feel like government, it's people who, by virtue of them, taking efforts in electing public representatives, they are saying, we're putting you there, but it does not exonerate us as public, people to take care of our issues. So yes, there has been a number of issues that one can attest that we have done well since the advent of democracy. But let's be honest, in this country, there are many things that needs to be done. There are many challenges. I normally argue the fact that we take, for instance, I'm giving examples, this substance abuse. Everybody's pointing at government. Where are the families? Allow me to give you an example. The Enyobeni tragedy. We happen to be, I will talk about child participation, which is one of the things that has been acknowledged globally, that South Africa is modeling, a system where we acknowledge the views of children. The Enyobeni tragedy, as we all know, there's a parent or parents in East London. Yeah. We happen to understand that they were watching, TV as a family. Around about 10 o'clock in the evening, they went all to their bedrooms. But when this thing was announced, early hours of the morning, one of the children who perished, the girl, is one who went to her bedroom, pardon me. So you ask yourself, and of course we are not pointing fingers at parents, but the reality is you can't, government is not in every household.
That's true. That's true, Mr. Chabalala. But thanks so much. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for this conversation, Mr. Chabalala. And thank you so much for that background. But let's fast track this. 30 years later, you've drawn a picture for us, about the initiative that was taken by the former President Nelson Mandela. But when we look at those initiatives in your department, and what would you say are you doing as a department to ensure that the rights of children are indeed protected? And of course, I mean, you point to a number of problems we are facing as a society, and we know that it's not just only the responsibility of the department, but let's take a look at those initiatives that you have undertaken as social development.
No, thank you very much. There are many things that have happened, and then I just want to quote maybe one profound example. You know, there are many countries, and of course, inclusive of South Africa, we are not aware that we've got an obligation by virtue of us having ratified these international treaties, and of course, continentally so, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, we've got an obligation to make sure that children participate on matters affecting them. As South Africa, likewise with many other countries that ratified those treaties, we've got an obligation to report to the UN and to the AU. South Africa has been acknowledged and, of course, recognized as one of the countries that are ensuring good practices, models in terms of child participation. We are very proud, and allow me to give a very quick 2 examples. In 2022, we had the Global Conference on the Elimination of Child Labor, the very first one in Africa, let alone in South Africa. In the history of the ILO, or the global conferences on the elimination of child labor, it was for the very first time that children were participating. It was not easy. Personally, I was chairing those meetings, and these meetings were like globally, global participants were part of that. And we came up with what we call the Dependant call for action on the elimination of child labor. And of course, the president was also there, and he acknowledged the important aspect of this. Secondly, we had, I think, same year in November, the second presidential summit on gender-based violence and femicide. Children had to be there and voice their expressions, their views, their opinions on the need to include Pillar 7, because we've got 6 pillars, 6 pillars in the strategic plan that has to do with GBVF. And it's work in progress.
Yeah.
And there are many others. I can talk about the child support grant.
Yes.
And I'm saying this in the midst of acknowledging the fact that we still have a lot of things that needs to be done. Institutionalization of coordination of children's rights. We are working very hard.
And maybe let's also get to the point of... let's get to the point of, one would say that you speaking a bit earlier on, that we still see that there are a number of challenges, especially in terms of recognizing the rights of children. And even more recently, we've seen that horrifying case in the Western Cape of Jocelyn Smith and, of course, the missing child. But what would you say when it comes to what more can be done by the department working hand in hand with the community? Because this is only not just the work of the department. What more can we do to ensure that the rights of children are protected?
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's very fair to have raised the fact that, we've got many challenges, inclusive of the one that you have just quoted from the Western Cape. Personally, and I think in government we are all agreeable to say, what had happened there, we saw people going all out in numbers, searching for that missing girl. And that's what we want. Actually, we don't have to wait and say, okay, government, come all out. And of course, the communities we're working with, and of course, I will use this terminology, the child rights governance. What we are saying, we need to get media, we need to get, faith-based organizations, we need to get, labor movements.
Yeah.
We need everybody, inclusive of families. So I think it's quite a technical issue, and it's a challenge. My point of view is that let's not always say, government, where are you when we are experiencing these challenges?
All right.
So yes, it's work in progress. We need many people to come on board. Let's be activists in this whole challenge that we're getting.
All right, Mr. Chabalala, thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for this conversation. That is David Chabalala. He is from the Department of Social Development and, of course, the Director for Child Rights and Advocacy.